Dynamic voices for a diverse church. This is Pass the Mic. Welcome to Pass the Mic. I'm Bo York, the executive producer for Pass the Mic, sitting here with your normal co-host, normal host, the host with the most, Jamar Tisby.
The man with the extensive bio.
The man with the extensive. I see, that's the thing. I can't do it like Tyler does. I wish I could.
The man, the myth, the legend. It's missing. There's a hole. There's a gap.
The myth, the legend, the two-time best-selling author, Mr. Blue Check Verified himself, Dr. Jamar Tisby.
And then you forget the jamartisby.substack.com.
But I thought you do that.
But don't worry. No, he does that. That's all
right.
good.
See, this is what happened. We went video first. So now Ryan is in charge of all of this. And so I've lost, I don't know anything anymore. I'm completely useless, as I have always been on this show. Man, we got something special today. So
your idea, I'm already going to place the blame / responsibility / credit where it belongs.
That's great. I'm sure if we ever get, if we say anything remotely controversial, I'm sure people will remember that, and I will be the one doing the hate mail. I'm sure that'll happen. Not at all. This is great. So, to commemorate the 10 year, we did kind of something special. We did something special, and then we kind of unintentionally did something even more special with reflecting on the 10 years, giving kind of an oral history of Pass the Mic. And to pull back even the curtains on that Pull Back the Curtain episode, it was only supposed to be like maybe an hour, and then it ended up being close to like 4 hours.
Yes.
We had like dinner reservations twice throughout that kept on getting canceled. It was a whole thing. And then by the end of it, we realized there were a lot of things we barely scratched the surface on. And so given the fact that after, getting the audio and realizing that, to tell the story, we really need to kind of pull out these moments from history to kind of go along with them. It's a heavy lift on the production side, but I think it's something really special. And why not revisit some of those moments that we really wish we had done then?
Yeah. Go a little deeper into some particular segments, which always going to shout out your incredible production and editing on Not the Voice, the Microphone, the Pass the Mic story. If you haven't listened to that 5-part series, you are missing out. And I don't want you to miss out. I care about you too much. I want you to make sure that you go back and listen to it. But you'll hear in that 5-part series some very significant events, what we constantly refer to in that series as canon events.
Yes.
But there are other events that, reach close to the level of canon events, very significant events.
Yeah.
That we just didn't get to go into detail. And so here's one of the opportunities where we get to actually have an episode where we go a little bit more into detail on one of those things.
Well, so that's the thing. At the very tail end, you had referenced, we didn't talk about MLK50. And either you or I had kind of mentioned that as kind of one of the ones that we didn't get a chance to go into. And as I was putting together like the clips for all of these different things we never didn't have time to talk about, I was reflecting like, man, what a crazy era even that little microcosm of a couple of months was in terms of the history of the civil rights movement. As months before MLK50, we'd had the 2 museums open up in Jackson, Mississippi. You and I were both present for it. We both had press passes, and
first time, official press passes.
It was the entire event was unfortunately crashed by some guy who was running the country at a time.
In Jackson, Mississippi, President Trump took a private tour of the Civil Rights Museum that opened today. The president spoke to a small crowd that included family members of assassinated civil rights leader Medgar Evers.
It was very frustrating because they kicked me out of my studio. The special forces or the
Secret Service?
The Secret Service kicked me out of my studio because we were in the block radius of the 2 museums opening up.
Wow.
And I had to, well, let me, I'll put it this way. My equipment was still in the building. Yeah, the equipment was there and the Secret Service were guarding the building. And then I had it when I needed it. I guess I'll say that.
End of story.
End of story. Yeah. But anyway, fast forward a couple months, we find ourselves in Memphis, Tennessee for MLK50, commemorating 50 years since Martin Luther King, of course, was assassinated at the Gray Motel. And this is an interesting moment in the history of the witness, of you and I personally, and kind of broader conversation in kind of our corner of Christendom, because this was not just a moment put on by the National Civil Rights Museum, not just a moment in which the relatives of Martin Luther King came back to the site of his tragic death to remember their father, their uncle, their grandfather, but also to those within our area of the evangelical space, it was an opportunity to do a, for lack of a better term, competing conference.
parallel event.
Parallel events. Let's go with
Yes. So go back a little bit. It's really helpful and even sometimes surprising for me to remember all that was going on racially in the United States at that time. So you mentioned the opening of the 2 museums in Mississippi. And for those who aren't familiar, it's the Mississippi Museum of History, but also the Civil Rights Museum. Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And which is the first state-funded civil rights museum in Mississippi, of all places.
And it's incredible in Jackson. If you're ever there, you absolutely need to go check it out.
It was really well done. And there was a lot of skepticism and question leading up to the opening of would they softball or whitewash the racist history of Mississippi. And they really didn't. They really are blunt and bold and honest about it in the best of ways of historical truth telling. But you mentioned there was sort of a cloud over the event because this Civil Rights Museum, a lot of Black folks were looking at it as an opportunity, finally our story to be told in Mississippi. And then the then governor of Mississippi at the time, Phil Bryant, invited Donald Trump, then president, and that caused an uproar to the extent that John Lewis, the congressman, pulled out of the event, and several other folks who were scheduled to speak pulled out.
And peace. Civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis and Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson boycotted the event, saying in a joint statement, President Trump's attendance and his hurtful policies are an insult to the people portrayed in this Civil Rights Museum.
So, once again, Mr. President, we don't need you to tell us in Mississippi what a civil rights movement is about.
Jackson's mayor, Chokwe Lumumba, held a press conference with civil rights activists ahead of the president's arrival.
We're standing in accord with what the ideals of this civil rights movement means. And that is why we choose not to share a stage with Donald Trump.
And then it was sort of anticlimactic in the sense that Trump did come, but it was for a private tour and wasn't part of the grand opening events. So anyway, that was middle of December. And then 4 months later, we have MLK50. So it's sort of in the air, this conversation about race, especially among Christians, in a way that is easy to forget how much conversation was going on at that time. And then the MLK50 event wasn't just about that particular day, April 4th. It was the months and months leading up to it that people were thinking about it, talking about it, articles, all of this stuff. So it is a conversation topic in almost every circle of Christianity, of the national conversation. And here we are at the sort of epicenter because Memphis is, of course, where King was assassinated, and the National Civil Rights Museum is built onto the Lorraine Motel. And if you have not been to the National Civil Rights Museum, put it on your list. Make a point to go. It is powerful. It is poignant. It is well done. It is informative. And it concludes at MLK's motel room, which is preserved almost exactly as it was that day in 1968.
Yeah. And I mean, it really is such an incredible experience. You feel... And I think like intentionally so, like you are walking through history.
Yes.
Like the way in which, like even at one point, you're kind of carving and going right through the buses. You're actually going, there's a whole section of walls of telephones with the vocal piece cut out so that you pick up and you are forced to listen and not respond to people telling their stories with the archival audio there. And then like it feels like a very visceral time travel experience. Like you say, it brings you up to the moment of the assassination itself. Yeah.
And so the museum has been there for decades. And of course, MLK's 50th anniversary of his assassination has been on their radar for years.
Oh, yeah.
By the time 2018 comes around.
Yeah, this didn't sneak up on them.
No. Nobody was in the staff meeting one day and was like, oh no, you know what's happening next year?
Right.
It's like,
well, it's 2018. Should we do something?
And I was on their like newsletter. And so for years and years and years, we're getting notifications about this, save the dates. Here's the next speaker who's been confirmed. Here's the run of show and events and all of this stuff. And so we had planned on going. You have an affinity for Memphis. I love the way you love cities.
Yeah.
Jackson, Memphis, New Orleans, of course. Now Houston.
I'm finding my feet in Houston. Yeah.
Certainly on the culinary scene.
Right.
Shout out. You've taken us to some great restaurants on our recording retreats. Anyway, so this is a very, very, very big deal, not only for the Civil Rights Museum, but for the city of Memphis. Mm-hmm. And for anybody who's involved in sort of racial justice, racial advocacy work. This is the thing. This is the event, and it's branded MLK50.
Yes.
And then we hear tell about another event taking place same time, same city, and get this, same name.
Well, you say we hear tell. Really, you hear tell specifically because you're reached out specifically as thoughts are starting to come together around this event.
Yes. So the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, ERLC, which at that point was headed up by a guy named Russell Moore, was in the SBC, very well respected in evangelical circles. For the ERLC, I get this sense that it did kind of sneak up this anniversary. From what I recall, they do an annual conference, and they had been planning on doing a conference, but at some point in 2017, maybe late 2016, don't quote me on the timeline, but not like years and years in advance like the Civil Rights Museum. At some point they realized, MLK's 50th anniversary of his assassination is coming up. We should commemorate that moment. We should speak to that moment.
This year, Gospel Coalition and the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission are gathering a group of gospel Christians, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian American, together to talk about what the situation looks like 50 years later in a country that is divided by issues of racial injustice.
Why? I'd be very curious to know the answer to that question.
I can only speculate. I'll bet you there are some interviews where Russell Moore's explaining that.
Sure.
But my sense is, because we were deeper in that world at that time, my sense is, like I said before, this conversation's pretty pervasive around race.
Right.
Whether it was stuff Trump was doing or the Unite the Right rally or, Black Lives Matter, anything of that nature, it had been coming up more and more in evangelical circles.
Hello, I'm Russell Moore. I'm here with the NFL's Benjamin Watson, and we're going to be together here in April at MLK50 event. Benjamin, why are you excited about our time together coming up?
Well, number one, because you asked me to come. But I'm excited because we're at a time, I believe in our culture, we're at a very pivotal point. And over the last several years, race has been brought to the forefront in various ways.
Do you think that, this is perhaps a dangerous speculation, but do you think that it does stem from the standpoint of not just race as a broad conversation, but it's specifically that the racial reconciliation movement of the past decade has brought us to a place that is clearly failing hard. And so we need to do something like in more of like a symbolic gesture as opposed to, you know what I mean?
So I think a couple of things. One, Russell Moore, more than a lot of evangelical leaders, has been paying attention to this conversation.
Yes.
So I think he's genuinely committed to progressing in terms of racial reconciliation and the conversation among evangelicals. So that's one factor. The other factor, I think, is there had been a sustained conversation and even pressure on evangelical organizations and institutions from the Gospel Coalition, which ended up co-hosting that parallel event with the ERLC.
That's right, yeah.
To, different Christian podcasts and publications like Christianity Today or you name it, right? So there had been, when we were part of that as Pass the Mic, as The Witness, which we changed our name to in 2017. I think we were part of making that a more urgent conversation. And in those early days, I would say from like 2014 up through around 2018, a lot of the conversation was Black folks and our allies looking at prominent white Christian leaders and saying, "Are you going to say anything? Like, are you going to pay attention to this? Is this on your radar?" Kind of a thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if, in so many words, that was part of the motivation of, if we're silent on MLK50, or if we just do a little like social media post or something that isn't very costly or take a lot of investment, then it can appear as if this isn't a priority, racial reconciliation.
I do like, there is something about that that feels very, and this is not at all to diminish the moment or the significance of the moment, but from that vantage point, there is a very low hanging fruit feel to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Sure.
This is like the bare minimum entry level frosting on the cake, so to speak.
Yeah, but it's also one of those things where if you didn't do it, the silence would be deafening.
Yes, exactly.
So there's a lot to unpack here, right? Like,
so but they reached out to you.
They reached out to me. Yes. Very important point. So folks at ERLC reached out to me because they were forming an advisory board and they wanted me to be on the advisory board. I ended up not participating beyond a phone call or two because I really wanted to invest time and energy in the MLK50 National Civil Rights Museum event, which I was not on the planning committee for, but I had, and eventually you and I had planned on going to and participating in. So that's where my focus was there. Mm-hmm. I was also a little miffed, if I'm honest. A bit miffed that instead of partnering with or encouraging people to attend the National Civil Rights MLK50 event, evangelicals decided to host their own event.
Why is the posture, we're going to do this our own, when there is something that already exists, which, as many churches did during the movement, you could have said, how can we help? Or how can we support? You tell us what you need from us. We have all of these resources. How can we support the event?
100%. Yeah. That, to me, was the crux of the situation. It was case in point of how evangelicals often approach racial injustice, is to say at the last minute or late, oh, there's a problem and we are the ones to do something about it. Instead of asking who's already doing something, who's already gained the expertise, the wisdom, the knowledge, and who can we come alongside or even behind and support. So I'm not impugning the motives of the organizers, but to me, it was indicative of this white savior complex. Mm-hmm. Of if there is a problem, then we are the best ones to solve it. Without doing much research, without knowing the local landscape or context very well at all. Right. And I'm quite sure, planners were aware of this. They got some local pastors involved in things of that nature. But it was still a parallel event. And it still irks me. It's under the same name, MLK50, and there was a subtitle to it of they called it Gospel Reflections from the Mountaintop.
That doesn't matter to Google.
It doesn't, right? and so even branding wise, right now you've got, like you said, accurately competing events. Yep. Because if I Google, MLK50,
to this day,
it's going to be one of those two. And I just think the National Civil Rights Museum earned the right to have a lock on that brand and that day.
Yeah.
They earned it. They earned it day in and day out over 20 plus years of providing historical educational content, of raising money, of hosting thousands upon thousands of visitors each year, and of planning their events for years and years and years in advance as a signature once in a lifetime commemoration of the person whose life much of the museum is centered around.
Yeah.
And for another organization, any organization, let alone an evangelical one, any organization to come in at sort of the last minute comparatively and pour enormous resources into hosting a parallel event with similar branding, I think it's disrespectful, honestly. Again, I'm not commenting on motives, but the way it was applied, the way it was enacted, it was tough to swallow.
Yeah. So they reach out to you because they want you to be part of this advisory board.
Right. Which they weren't inviting me to speak, by the way. It was help us think through this because...
Well, hang on now. That changes everything. Had they invited you to speak, is this a different conversation?
Well, no, it's just a different level of, I think, how they viewed me or how they weighed my voice.
Sure.
Maybe they would have eventually, but no, I don't think they would have. So I say that because they had reached out to me early in January in 2017, and I had indicated I couldn't be on their advisory board, but they left me on the website.
Yeah, that's interesting.
For over a year. And it could have just been a like webmaster oversight.
That's
it
not
just could be anything, right?
No, but that's not it. I've done that kind of thing before where like, cause I've been part of like startup energy and like that world where it's like, you need to like just put him. Oh, we had a conversation. Do you mind if we put you as an advisor? You slap the picture on the website.
I get it.
Equal level to like the guy that you really go to all the time. You know what I mean?
Right. So who knows? But I know I was on there long after I indicated I couldn't actually participate or wouldn't be participating. And so, in that whole time, they never invited me to speak. The input I gave was, there's this National Civil Rights Museum event going on that y'all can sort of come alongside. But if you're going to do this event, then I'm looking at what you have planned and who you're thinking about speaking. And it's like, there's not enough Black folks and there's not enough local Black people involved in this. You're sort of parachuting in with your own folks. So anyway, all of that was going on. They wanted my input.
Which they did expand the roster.
They did definitely expand the roster. And you can look at it now, and it's a lot of great speakers who I respect.
About to say, like a lot of the folks that did speak that we've got a lot of love and respect for. And even a lot of what was said, still really powerful stuff.
Yes, absolutely. There were very powerful talks given by Charlie Dates, Micah Edmondson, Christina Edmondson. There's a list here of really informed people who I think added a lot of value.
And a lot of those talks are even still talked about today.
Yeah, they
in
are.
those circles. You know what I mean?
For good and for ill.
Yeah, well,
we'll get to that.
Hey everybody, this is Tyler.
This is Dr. Jamar Tisby.
And we are excited that you're listening to this episode of Pass the Mic, but let me encourage you to support us. You can do so by going to patreon.com/Pass the Mic. And for just $1 an episode.
Just $1?
Now that's the bare minimum. That's 4 quarters. But if you want to go higher,
Okay,
5, 10,
higher.
15,
That's
20,
right.
25, whatever it is, that will keep this show going and keep the high quality that hopefully you enjoy. So thank you for listening, but you can take it to the next level.
Patreon.com/Pass the Mic. We appreciate you. Hey folks, Dr. Jamar Tisby here, and I want to make sure that you know about the Justice Takes Sides brand. This is merchandise, this is apparel to help you represent your values. This is about getting people off the sidelines and into the struggle for justice that's ongoing today. Go visit justicetakesides.com, get your merchandise and apparel there, and follow us on Instagram at Justice Takes Sides.
You have these like two now parallel tracks because you've got the events are happening. We go up to Memphis.
With press passes.
With press passes.
I just want to shout that out. And I think you did that, so shout out.
Well, I think it was a team effort. But anyway, yeah. So we got the press passes, and we are now participating in that regard, not as people creating content, but as people there to report and experience and tell the story thereafter. We are rubbing shoulders with other people from the media.
Amazing folks.
Yeah, which was incredible. We're getting the opportunity to sit down and go to a lot of these panels with living legends, like literal living legends who are telling their stories. And I think that for me anyway, one of the most powerful thing is that the spirit of this event was about bringing together the old and the new, so to speak, bringing together this multi-generational movement, connecting the civil rights movement of the past and the civil rights movement of the present together with a lot of like Thanksgiving dinner table level tension around that differing of opinions on the way in which things are done now versus then. The sense of like reverence for what came before, but the desire to have seen more back then, the excitement for what's happening now, but the wish that there would be more focus like this. And that tension was palpable.
It really was.
As well as the respect.
Yes.
It was an amazing thing to be a part of, just to witness.
Can I please get you on your feet to welcome to the stage the great Congressman John Lewis. And remain on your feet, ladies and gentlemen, for the man who is the blueprint, the creator, the architect of
We may have bits and pieces here and there and yonder. I consider John one of my congresspeople and a number of others. We have bits and pieces, but we do not have a political party. If we are to regain a political party that moves in the directions that the country was moving in, we, the people, are going to have to organize from a nonviolent perspective and create campaigns in city after city that helps to forge a new party, a new Democratic Party maybe, that will do our will.
Dr. King wrote an essay when he was a college student. When he was 19, he wrote an essay for the Morehouse campus newspaper on the purpose of education. And the essay says, education is about intelligence plus character. And he talks about Governor Talmadge of Georgia and says he's very academically successful. He's even in Phi Beta Kappa, but he doesn't believe in my equality. He believes I'm inferior. So I'm not sure he's educated, right? And so what Dr. King was asking was, isn't part of education about conscience, about developing moral conscience? And
why it is that persistent poverty is not getting solved. And that is not to say I disagree with anything that my colleagues have said. I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. And I'm going to see if this is as safe a space as I think it is. Because I'm going to say that one of the things that has been a surprise to the Black middle class community is that abandoning the inner city didn't work for us. Right? Abandoning poor Black middle underclass did not work. Okay, I'm egged on now.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So I just want to invite people to remember with us what that event was like. Yeah. So number one, it was a who's who of like public intellectuals, racial justice folks, activists all over the board. So I met Roland S. Martin, the Black journalist. I met Beverly Daniel Tatum, author of Why Are the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. I met Bernice King.
When my mother came back to Memphis 50 years ago on April the 8th, I was not able to come. And so this is especially meaningful for me to be here 50 years later around this commemoration that we are having.
Youngest daughter of Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King. Got the picture. Yeah. I met, we went to events with Congressman John Lewis, with James Lawson, an activist. We met Bree Newsom.
Personal hero. That was big.
Yes. She climbed the flagpole in front of the State House in South Carolina and took down the flag.
She's a big inspiration for me with Red Flag.
Yeah, great point. Great point. I still learn a lot from her to this day. And we actually got to do a brief interview with her.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are constantly having conversations about is like the usefulness of the term racial reconciliation. Pluses, minuses. What is your take on that term?
I think the issue reconciliation is not the problem. Right? I think it's the unwillingness or the reluctance to also include justice. That's the issue. And I think King spoke very much to that. He was calling for peace, but peace requires justice. There's no such thing as peace in the absence of justice. Like that kind of peace is just order. You
Which was an incredible honor.
She was so gracious.
So gracious. Yeah. Like I had never heard of us, I'm sure.
Instantly treated us like we were family. Like it was incredible.
She even said yes was amazing. Yes. So shout out to Bree Newsom Bass now. And one of the things that I loved about the event is that faith was infused throughout it.
Yes.
And effortlessly so.
This
Yes.
afternoon, we remember the man who had a faith like none other. And we celebrate his legacy by committing to answer the question that he posed. Where do we go from here?
I did go to the Vatican. I'm still processing that. I went to the Vatican to have a private meeting with the Pope, and I was actually very nervous for a number of reasons, one of which I'm not the head of a nation. I'm not currently leading an active movement. So I asked the Lord, what meaneth thou this? And I'm sure as time continues to unfold, it'll become clear for me.
In the very gift of life, and that we had to use the gift of life, that's a precious gift from creation. We have to use that gift of life and exploit it on the noble sides of humanity.
It wasn't as if, okay, here's the part where we talk about religion. It was simply a result of the guests they had, the speakers they had, the fact that it was very Black-centered. You cannot do an event commemorating MLK, the Reverend Dr. MLK, or talk about the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the core of which was the Black church, without a faith element. And what I appreciated about it was that it was organic. It wasn't programmed into it in some sort of artificial or stuck-on way, nor was it apologetic, as if, we do have to mention, religion.
Like how do we wrestle?
Well, it was just very matter of fact, right?
Exactly.
Like it was not a explicitly Christian event, and organizers and speakers had full knowledge that many people there wouldn't necessarily be religious at all, let alone Christian. But it just came out, and not in a forceful, proselytizing, shove it down your throat kind of way, but a natural, organic, if people would make reference to God, they would have a segment where they spoke, but they would open in prayer, and that wasn't necessarily on the agenda. They were singing, all of that stuff. So it was so interesting that there's this parallel event, which is billed as gospel reflections, right? Billed as explicitly Christian. And yet you could go to the National Civil Rights Museum event and feel as if you were immersed in a sort of Christian event with all the references and the way it informed the program.
Well, it's an event that is put on by many Christians as opposed to a Christian event.
Yes, right? Exactly.
So it kind of, as we kind of referenced before when we showed up at this thing, as media, there with kind of press passes for the Witness, for Pass the Mic, which is a specifically Christian media outlet. You know what I mean? Like the fact that we were there and we could just kind of talk about it.
We just be there. Yeah.
Very natural.
Be us.
Yeah. With other people from, I don't know, MSNBC or, from whatever blogosphere and everything else. And there was no weirdness about you know what I mean? Like
that was refreshing,
yeah,
and kind of welcome as we were new to being at an event in that capacity. The other thing I really appreciated about it was the topic of conversation, which was a lot of different topics, but in general, it was not should we do racial justice, which is a conversation in a lot of Christian spaces. The conversation was, how do we do racial justice? And that's where you get to the intergenerational kind of back and forth about shortcomings of the movement 60 years ago, the ways the present movement has tried to correct, the conversation about, is there an overcorrection or is there enough informing of past generations to present generations? That was an incredibly generative, solutions orient, and it was done in a spirit of let's move forward, let's find solutions, not combative, you were wrong, I'm right kind of a thing.
Yeah. It felt like even at the larger events, because there was the one that we went to that I'm thinking specifically where you had all of these icons from the past and present up on stage, and there was this sense of active debate. Like, it was amazing to me that we got a chance to be in this reflective moment, of which, to be honest, at that level, with that spotlight, there hasn't really been since.
That's right. The closest I think I've come to it was the grand opening of the Equal Justice Initiative's Lynching Memorial and Museum.
Yes.
Had a similar vibe to that on the grand opening. But it's rare. It's so rare. Once every few years, if that, right? And it was incredibly refreshing because us as an organization, The Witness and Pass the Mic, we were really still in the thick of it in terms of coming to grips with having a place, having felt like we didn't have a place in evangelical and reformed spaces, figuring out what our space would be, figuring out our identity, because the name change was only is a few months old at that point.
So it's interesting. I remember, so then Pastor Aaron James, who was part of our team, kind of made the analogy that he kind of saw us, if RAND was kind of our infancy, then those days in particular, we were kind of in our adolescence. We were kind of trying to determine our identity. Maybe sometimes that was like a little bit of like chest puffing out and, you know, and that sort of thing. And maybe sometimes it was, we might have like, you know, stumbled over some things as we were kind of finding our footing. But for the most part, it was this very like, okay, we have to make some decisive moves and like, you know, make some bold statements early on as we are declaring ourselves. Some might say justice takes sides.
That's right. That's right. So I say all that to say it was an incredible event.
Yes.
It was very well done. It was extremely informative, creative, thought-provoking, and it would have edified anybody who went there with an open mind. And I'm grateful that we did. It remains to this day one of the seminal events of my, you know, background in racial justice advocacy.
So that's the thing. We're there. We're having this amazing experience. But at the exact same time, literally down the street, Main Street, the other event is going on. And as was already been referenced, some of the speakers are people that we greatly respect. A lot of great talks that to this day still have significant relevancy for those, you know, inside evangelicalism.
King was known to listen to the spirituals for hours on end, not just being entertained, but learning their theology, imbibing their hope. His legacy of redemptive suffering stands within this very old part of the Black church tradition and cannot be understood properly apart from it. From King's redemptive suffering.
When this chief tax collector made rich, not from the hard work of his hands, but from the manipulation of his own people. When he received salvation, he makes a startling pronouncement. He actually says that he will give to the poor and restore those he has defrauded. The man who hurt and defrauded others is now the same man who can help those he victimized and pilfered. We can learn much from Zacchaeus about the kind of evidence that should mark the lives of people who walk with God. He recognizes that he has defrauded people and that the poor need the help of the wealthy. And I must admit, as I prepare to leave the stage, I'm taken by Zacchaeus' honesty and his desire to restore what he took. But I must also admit that this gathering today has got to do more than apologize. We've heard apologies. We appreciate the Southern Baptist Convention apologizing in 1995. For its participation in and compliance with slavery and segregation. We appreciate that apology for its absence in the civil rights movement. But what I want to propose to you as I lead today is, we need to move from apology to strategy. The same groups of people that hurt entire generations through segregation are the same groups of people that can now end segregation. We can fix the problems that we've created. An apology is nice, but it's time to strategize to figure out how we.
But then you also had other moments that kind of undermined the entire event as a whole.
In his early 20s, Martin Luther King turned away from these great objective biblical realities, and you can read about it with sadness in many of his papers in those days. And I don't know if he came home. Many believe he did.
But it's very notable that this is happening in a bubble and that we're not there because we're invited to a dinner with a lot of the speakers because obviously there's a lot of
the ERLC event.
Yes. Yeah. There's one point in the evening you and I are getting dinner at a restaurant and some Pass the Mic listeners. You remember this?
I do. Yeah.
And they come in and they're like, oh, Jamar Tisby, and you're the white guy, right? But like, you know, it's interesting because they assumed that you were actually part of the ERLC event.
Well, yeah, which would be a natural assumption, I'm sure, at that point. But yeah, we met Beth Moore for the first time.
That's right.
We interacted with some PTM listeners. We connected with some longtime friends.
You pulled up a picture from the dinner that we had, and it's so interesting looking at this kind of who's who picture plus me. And I'm like, and I have been like the oddball out in a lot of different scenarios. I'm not afraid of being that guy, but it is always interesting. Like, oh, what a historic image. If I wasn't in it.
No, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you were there. So I think it was a missed opportunity to really come alongside local organizations,
right,
committed to the work,
right,
and get exposure to some new voices. Because as amazing as a lot of the speakers were at the ERLC TGC event, in a sense, it was the usual suspects. It was folks. Yeah. It was folks in those circles you would have heard of, and you would have been excited to hear speak. But it wasn't new voices, and they weren't voices informed by different streams and traditions in the activist, circle.
Okay, so this is the part where I'm gonna play some devil's advocate, okay? Because there's a couple of different angles to slice this, and one is exactly that. Let's start off with that, right? Because the reality is that from what we got to experience with this like deep level inside, family conversation, closed door conversation happening on a large scale, right? So we got to experience that with MLK50. Perhaps not the best conversation for people who are still trying to dip their toes and test the waters to see if they're actually going to be involved in anything even resembling racial justice or equity building, right? Like that's so having a event that speaks to the moment for those folks who probably wouldn't have shown up for MLK50 in the first place, even if the same organization was fueling it or supporting it, provided the platform for a lot of these conversations that might not have happened otherwise.
Valid point. From the news reports after the event, 4,000 people showed up to the ERLC event. That is not an insignificant number. That's not an insignificant impact on the local economy, hotels, restaurants, things like that. So there is an argument to be made that, well, most of these folks wouldn't have shown up at all had there not been an event put on by these organizations. I get that. I get that. And there's also within that sort of angle, the idea that maybe we need 101 level events.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And the National Civil Rights Museum would be like a 301. It is for folks a little bit further on. It certainly wasn't geared, the National Civil Rights Museum events weren't geared for people who were just entering the racial justice conversation. No, it was already assuming you're sort of not only on board, but you have a bit of background knowledge, so that the speaker lineup there, you knew who these folks were and their significance and the topics that they were addressing. You could sort of follow along, which I am very not confident that a largely evangelical audience would have been able to latch on to. But at the same time, why are you still at the 101 level? Like at this point,
We're at different places.
We're at different places. But here's the other way I like to think about it is, were there alternatives to holding a parallel event? So for instance, if you encourage folks to attend the National Civil Rights Museum events, and they were broadcasting it online, so even if you couldn't physically go, tuning in and then having a post-event that's truly reflections, but reflections on the National Civil Rights Museum event. And then you can bring in your speakers, you can bring in your panelists, you can listen to questions from the audience and from people submitting online. And you're truly reflecting and helping people process an event that evangelicals didn't plan, didn't control, or anything like that. But you're encouraging folks to get out of their silo, especially on topics like racial justice, where honestly, evangelicals don't have a real healthy, in-shape silo to begin with. It's not super great to be in that silo, but encouraging people to get out and then, okay, come back. Let's process this as a church.
Yeah.
Let's process this knowing our history and our patterns of not addressing this really well and deal with that. Right. And that's just one scenario. We can think of half a dozen other scenarios if we had enough time. Right. And to say that we could have accomplished similar goals a different way that maybe not even wouldn't have taken away from the National Civil Rights Museum event, but would have added to it.
Well, and then there's also something to be said for if we're still at the 101 level at that point, maybe one-time 101 level event isn't the best thing that's needed.
That's
but
right.
more of like an ongoing effort, which I mean, many people represented certainly, do in their own work
in their
for sure.
individual and
but with that level of commitment, resources, ongoing, I don't know. I mean,
well, and just to be fair, the ERLC TGC event, they contributed $16,000 to a local pastors fund,
right?
And they
scholarship, right?
Yeah, they gathered over $1.5 million for I think it was local scholarships for Christian colleges and institutions, people in the Memphis area.
Okay.
So they were trying. They were at least cognizant of let's not just dip in, extract, and leave.
I think I misremembered how that scholarship was applied.
Well, look it up. But yeah, I do believe there was a local flair to it.
Well, that's good.
It said, yeah,
because I thought it was a denominational flair, which
it was the MLK50 Dream Forward Scholarship Initiative that will allow Christian colleges and seminaries to invest in the educational future of minority students.
Okay.
So yeah, that sounds more broad.
Okay.
But yeah, education. But I remember my critique of such initiatives. Are you sending Black students especially into the very institutions that are creating unhelpful narratives around race and justice?
Yeah.
To be trained in that.
Yeah.
Instead, if you're going to give a scholarship, let it be no strings attached, go wherever you want. And maybe you can say, oh, well, it's got to be faith-based or something of that nature, but it doesn't have to be our, SBC seminary or something like that. So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's one devil's advocate question or approach. The other is maybe a little bit more selfish, if I can put it like that. And that's that even today, you look up, you do a Google search for MLK50. What do you find? You find the organization that was actually founded on that day at that event that continues to do work. You also find the ERLC's events. These, like, you look down, you see like boom, 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 almost like two here, two here, two here, two here, like all throughout. But where's the witness? Where's the work that we did? Where's the podcast episodes? Where's the content that we created? It's not that we didn't create it, because we definitely did, but what was the long tail value of us making the choice to do the MLK50 as opposed to the ERLC's MLK50 tagline TBD?
I feel like I'm channeling Tyler Burns in this. I think he'd had some strong opinions on it.
Yes, definitely.
But my thinking is a few things. One, wouldn't it be even more powerful if there was no MLK50 ERLC and MLK50 National Civil Rights Museum, and it was just the National Civil Rights Museum?
Yeah, of course.
MLK50, right? So that's a missed opportunity or a elbowing in on the branding that dilutes the long tail of the National Civil Rights Museum event, right? So should there even be those two? But you're asking, why aren't there three, essentially?
Not necessarily even that. It's really more of like, what was gained or what was the point? You know what I mean? Like in a long time, like in the moment, it was very clear what the point was.
Yep.
But looking back now, was it just a drop in the bucket? Like, was there actually any impact in making the decision we made?
So a few things. Number one, the witness in terms of the algorithm has never shown up high on the radar of anything anywhere, whether it's Pass the Mic and rankings on like iTunes or Google searches or whatever, right? Like, and partially we can say the same thing of what if white evangelical organizations had come alongside the witness in a no strings attached kind of way to maximize our impact. So that's one thing. But the other thing is integrity. So I think for us, especially at that adolescent period of our identity as the witness, it was super important for us to draw a line and say, are we truly committed to being Black-centered? Because this is one where we could be platformed. We could have been, press passes. We could have been journalists on the scene. More likely, we could have been speakers, me and Tyler, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And that would have been incredible exposure because in addition to the 4,000 people who showed up for the event, there were thousands online who accessed day of and thousands more who accessed after the fact, right? So in terms of like name recognition, exposure, brand, that would have been an incredible boost in terms of profile for us. But in terms of identity, I think it would have harmed us. It would have confused us. And so if nothing else came out of it, we as the witness and as Pass the Mic were able to stand on business, as the young folks say today. I don't even know what that means, but it sounded good in the moment. If nothing else came out of it, for us as the witness and Pass the Mic, it formed our identity in crucial ways because it demonstrated our genuine commitment to being both Christian and Black at the same time and committing our time, our talent, our resources to an event that better embodied that for us. And we resisted the temptation to compromise, I would have called it, and exchange platform and recognition for an event that wasn't really true to who we wanted to be and who we were becoming at the time.
Yeah, there it is.
Lessons.
I was about to say lessons and legacy from all of this.
White evangelicals who are concerned about race. Yay. Thank you. I'm glad. Welcome. But you don't always have to be the one to provide the solution. Matter of fact, probably more often than not, I'm certain more often than not, it's going to be more helpful to provide resources and support for stuff that's already happening. This is the philosophy behind the Witness Foundation. We want to empower the next generation of Black Christian leaders to do racial justice. So instead of forming your own, mentorship, your own internship, your own scholarship, donate to the Witness Foundation because we're already Black-centered and Christian. We already have the social networks, the ecclesiastical networks to access these folks. We already have a track record of talking about this, moving toward racial justice in these ways. And your resources, which is primarily money, I'm not afraid to say we need money, right? But also in-kind donations, whether you have, marketing or social media or video or audio expertise. Actually, we're covered on the audio and the video, but we can use more support. All of that stuff. There's other ways to support that's just not monetary. It could be skills. It could be making connections and introductions and things of that nature. Yeah. So I just want, if for white Christians who are listening, I want your reflex to be, how can I come alongside and support something that's already happening versus how can I start something new and my own thing that will not have the wisdom and experience that these other ones do. Not saying they couldn't be good at some point, but there are already other folks and organizations doing it well. So for Black Christians and our allies, there are going to be some choices, some particular crossroads where we have to decide, are we genuinely committed to centering the marginalized? Are we genuinely committed to amplifying the voices that have historically been silenced or muted? And are we willing to pass up an opportunity at greater platform, greater riches, greater recognition in order to do that? And it's at those critical moments that not only is your commitment and character tested, but it actually builds your commitment and character for the long haul. So I'm grateful that we did it as an organization, because I think we may not even be having the same conversations today if at those critical junctures we had to make those choices.
That's good, man. Well, there you go. It's a little behind the mic from MLK50 as the rain comes down around us. So you may have heard throughout the course of this episode as the rain and the lightning and the thunder has come down. It's been a storm outside, but I think we are very much at peace from the decisions made. How about that? That was a Jabbar Tisby right there.
Very smooth. Like it.
But that's going to do it for us. If you would, please consider becoming a patron of the show, patreon.com/passthemic. So until next time, we'll see you soon on the next
Pass the Mic.